Hello again, friends. Welcome to another installment of reading about continents, countries, and maps. We've been reading for many weeks now um, about countries, continents, and maps. And the last few days we've been taking one continent at a time. So we read about North America, South America. Yesterday we read about Europe. Today we're going to read, if I remember, Asia and Africa. They're going to cover two continents at once. But before we get started, it's always good to review what we read last time so that we can try to get some of those details into our brains for the rest of our lives. So yesterday we read that Europe is the second smallest continent in the world in terms of size, but that there are 44 countries in Europe. I think there was only 12 in South America, even though South America was bigger. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe 9 or 10 in total in all of North America, including Central America. So Europe has many more countries, and you can see a lot of smaller countries in the eastern part of Europe. We talked about some of the important, some of the countries we hear about the most, including Ireland and the United Kingdom, which is England, France, Italy, where the Vatican City is, Greece, Spain is over here, Germany. So really important countries that we talked about. And so we learned how every country has its own customs and governments and laws and languages. And for example, Austria is mountainous and they speak German mostly. Whereas Ireland is an island country, and in Ireland they speak English, a little bit of Gaelic. There's a picture of Ireland. We learned about the biggest city in the world. In Europe, the biggest city is Moscow, the capital of Russia. And Russia also has the biggest river, the Volga River. The highest mountain, Mount Elbrus, right there. And the biggest lake, Lake Ladoga, the biggest lake in all of Europe. So we learned that Russia has a lot of the biggest places in Europe. It's also the biggest country. It actually spans, or it runs from Europe into Asia. It's the only country in the world that covers, I should say it's one of the only countries in the world that sits on two continents. I actually think the country of Turkey might also sit in two different continents. Speaking of that, okay, my daughter is screaming for some reason. Here's Greece. Turkey is over here. And this little part of Turkey is in Europe, and then on the other side is Asia. So I think Turkey is also covers two continents. But there aren't many countries that are on two different continents. Russia and Turkey are two of the only ones. Then we learned that in addition to Moscow, there are many other beautiful cities in Europe, including Paris with the Eiffel Tower, London, the capital. So Paris is the capital of France, where they say merci beaucoup. London, the capital of England, where they say thank you, sir. And that's Big Ben and Westminster, where the British government works. We learned about the Acropolis in Athens and the Roman Colosseum from ancient Rome in Italy. So those are some of the details that we want to get into our brain for the rest of our life. So now we're going to read Chapter 6, Africa and Asia. All right, so it says Africa is the second largest continent in the world, and it has the second highest number of people. There are 54 countries in Africa with more than 1,500. That's 1,500 spoken languages. I did not know that. So there's 10 more countries in Africa than in Europe, but there's 1,500 languages. That's amazing. Like Europe, each African country has its own government and laws. Algeria is the biggest country in Africa. Seychelles, a country made up of islands, is the smallest. There's the Seychelles out off the coast of Africa. Okay. Other places that are really interesting. So there's Egypt, the pyramids. That's where Moses led the Israelites. That's Israel, by the way, right there. So Egypt, Israel, neighbor countries. There's the Sahara Desert that we learned about in science. The Savannah, we also learned about in science, down below the desert. By the way, we learned about how Jane Goodall lived with the chimpanzees in Tanzania. There's Tanzania. South Africa is the name of the country at the southern end of Africa. So other really important places. It says Africa has busy modern cities with thousands of people rushing here and there. The modern city of Luxor on the bank of Egypt's Nile River was built on the site of an ancient Egyptian city. Today you see the old and the new side by side. So thinking that's Luxor on the Nile River in Egypt. Cape Town in South Africa is the southernmost city on the African continent. Look at that. There's Cape Town, and I'm pretty sure that's a volcano behind Cape Town. All right, Cape Town, South Africa. The longest river in the world, the Nile River, is in Africa. Remember, we learned the second longest river is the Amazon River in South America. We were wondering, well, what's the longest? Now we know. The longest river in the world, the Nile River, is in Africa. Let's take a look at a map here and see if we can see it. Yeah, the Nile River, it starts up here in the Mediterranean. It goes all the way down through Egypt, and I think it actually goes all the way, you can't see it as much, but it goes all the way down into the rainforests of Central Africa. It also says the largest hot desert, the Sahara Desert, is also in Africa. So if I go back up here, this is the largest desert. It basically covers the whole top third of Africa, from Morocco and Sudan all the way over to Egypt and bordering on Israel on the eastern side of Africa. All right. It says Africa also has Lake Victoria, the second largest lake in the world. I did not know that. Africa's highest mountain is Mount Kilimanjaro. The giraffe, the tallest land animal in the world, lives in Africa. So again, these would be boats, I'm pretty sure, on the Nile River. There's the Sahara Desert. There is Mount Kilimanjaro in the background with the giraffe, which is the tallest land animal. I'm going to infer that that's probably another picture of the Nile River with some hippopotamuses. Now we're moving on to Asia. It says Asia is the largest continent in the world. There are 48 countries in Asia, so not as many countries as Africa, but more land. Asia is also the most populated continent in the world, with more than 2,000 languages spoken there. Russia is not only the largest country in Europe, it is also the largest country in Asia. So take a look. Here's a map of Russia. If I'm not mistaken, Russia covers something like 12 time zones. The United States covers, depending on how you look at it, we cover either 4 or 5 time zones. In fact, Russia is the largest country in the world. China, though, has more people than any other country. So here's China. China is the largest country in terms of people. Russia is the largest country in terms of land. So here's the Kremlin in Western Russia, in the European part of Russia. But all this area over here is Eastern Russia. And this part of Russia here, Siberia, that actually comes really close to touching Alaska in the United States. So when you look at this map, China, the panda bears come from China. There's Japan. By the way, in Japan, we say thank you. In Japan, you say domo arigato. Domo arigato. And here's India, where they say nani or shukriya. Right? So it's said that China has more people than any other country in the world. The Maldives, a group of islands, is the smallest Asian country right there underneath India. Right there, the Maldives. By the way, these islands over here called the Indies, Indonesia, that is where Christopher Columbus was trying to get to when he bumped into North America instead. You see a really big river here in China called the Yangtze River. The highest mountain in the whole world, Mount Everest, is in Asia. Mount Everest is 5.5 miles high. That's like from Holy Apostles to basically, if you were going to go from Holy Apostles almost to like State Fair Park, if you know where the State Fair is. Get kind of close to Miller Park. The largest lake in the world is a body of water called the Caspian Sea. Like Russia, this lake is in both Europe and Asia. The longest river in Asia is called the Chinese Yangtze River. The giant panda lives in the bamboo forests of China. So there's Mount Everest, 5.5 miles high. There's the panda bear, and they eat bamboo in the bamboo forests of China. So let's go look back at our map for a second. There's Mount Everest. It's in the country of Nepal, which is between India and China. The Caspian Sea is actually a lake, a great lake, like Lake Michigan. But this is the biggest lake in the world. It's bigger than Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan. And it's part of it touches on Russia here. It's part of it's in Europe, and part of it is in Asia. Okay. Let's see what else we can see here. Oh, Tokyo. Tokyo is the capital city of Japan. More than 38 million people live in the city of Tokyo. In springtime in Japan, people celebrate the cherry blossoms that flower at this time. Udaipur in India is known as the City of Lakes. This beautiful walled Indian city is a popular place for people from all over the world to visit. So there's a picture of a park in Tokyo. Look at their benches that they sit on. They look like small tables with bigger tables between them, and then little mats that people sit on. And you can see the cherry blossoms. Let me see if I can make that bigger for you guys. I don't know if you can see the cherry blossoms any better. Pretty. All right. So, City of Lakes in India, Udaipur. Beautiful walled Indian city is a popular place for people from all over the world. I don't know if you can see Udaipur. It's beautiful. All right, so that's Africa and Asia. Tomorrow we're going to read all about Australia and Antarctica. So very quickly, what are some of the details that we learned about Asia and Africa? We learned about cities like Udaipur in India, Tokyo in Japan, the cherry blossoms in Japan, how panda bears live in bamboo forests in China. The highest mountain in the world is Mount Everest in the country of Nepal. There's Udaipur in India. We learned about the Yangtze River. We learned about the smallest country in Asia, the Maldives. We learned about the Caspian Sea, the biggest lake in the world. We learned again some more about how Russia is the biggest country in the world in terms of land, covering Europe and Asia, but China is the biggest country in the world in terms of population, people. Now, I'll also give you a fun fact. India is the second biggest country in the world in terms of population. Okay, and then we learned about Africa, how in Africa the highest mountain is Mount Kilimanjaro. The tallest land animal is the giraffe. We learned about the Nile River, the longest river in the world, and about the Sahara Desert, the largest hot desert in the world. We learned about Cape Town, the southernmost city in Africa. We learned about Luxor, up on the Nile River in Egypt. We learned that in Africa there's over 1,500 languages, and that in Asia there's over 2,000 languages. That's amazing, things that we never knew. All right, so thank you for exploring Africa and Asia with me. Have a most excellent night. Tell somebody at home about the things you learned about Africa and Asia, and I will read with you tomorrow when we learn all about Australia and Antarctica. Cheerio.